we don't have anything else to do, you know, and especially now that, you know, it's dark out here, a lot of guys don't want to do their night flying. So
Yeah.
All right, guys, here we go. I'm gonna
awesome.
say admit all here. All right, cool. All right, Ryan, by the way, if you hear that beeping noise that you always seem to pick out for me, let me know. But I think I've got it. I think I've got it fixed this time. So, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining tonight. Hope everyone is doing well and staying dry if you're here in the Northern Virginia area. It's been pretty rainy. And as always, what we're going to do is give ourselves a few minutes to get situated, settled in, and get going on Facebook Live. And we typically have a few people filter in over from that. So if you want to join the conversation, the question and answer afterwards, feel free to come into the Zoom just so that you can do that. But great to see everybody. Great to see some familiar faces, new faces and names, it looks like. So thank you again for joining us tonight. Let's see who we have online. Hey, Rick Keller, it's nice to see you. I saw you had a nice flight home from North Carolina recently. And Cheryl, how are you? Good. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure we were good on the voice here. Let's see who else we've got online. We've got Johnny Ingalls online with us tonight. You're always joining us, brother. I like it. It's great.
I'm busy, man. Sometimes late, but I'm trying to get in here.
Yeah, love it, man. Thanks for joining as always.
We need to go flying soon, Johnny.
Yeah, man. I got to get my BFR done this month.
And where are you going to do it at? Do you know, or what's your plan on it?
Been flying with Tim's group out there.
Oh, Aero Elite. Good.
Aero Elite. So I'll probably go there. I haven't decided yet what to do it in. I'm checked out in the Grumman and the 172 G1000. But I'm thinking about doing the BFR in the 182. Get that one knocked out.
Yeah, that's a 182 turbo, T turbo, I believe. If I
it is.
Yeah, I did my I actually did my BFR, my flight review in that plane as well back in December. It's a good plane. Mm-hmm.
I've flown a 182 straight leg and I've flown a 182 RG, but never a turbo, but I've flown other turbo aircraft.
Okay.
The Bravo is great.
Flown a couple turbo arrows and those.
Yeah, Chris Jackson, you've been flying Delta Bravo a lot.
I did all of my IFR training in Delta Bravo. I mean, I love me a turbo. Set the power, go all the way up. You don't mess with it at all until you lean out. You know, you lean out for cruise. That's it. It's so much more simple. Now, when they have trouble, way more trouble. Like their spark plugs apparently are like vacuum spark plugs, and so shops can mess them up if they throw the wrong one in there. That's the problem Delta Bravo had. It was losing pressure through its spark plugs or something like that.
Wow.
Oh, really?
But
wow.
It's a great platform. I mean, besides having that crap 140, that's the worst part about it. Other than that, it's a great plane.
Crap 140. That's hilarious. Yeah, that's a good plane though. It can haul.
So, yeah, it hauls ass.
But yeah, thank you again for everybody joining us tonight. We still have a few people coming in here on Zoom. We'll probably get kicked off here in about 6 minutes. So feel free to say hello to anybody. Lucy, it's great to see you. How are you? You're always joining us too. I love it. Oh, it looks like 182. The 182 is for sale now, by the way. It sounds like via Jonas in the chat. So I wasn't aware of that. Not yours?
No.
That 182. Okay. Well, I don't know whose it is then, but let's see. 182. So who on the call was joining us last night for the Fast Team event? Anybody? It looks like there's definitely some people here. Yeah. Anybody that was on the call last night, what'd you think of it? Any thoughts, reactions, helpful? All that
I
good
really
stuff?
wish the FAA would reclassify the LMA so software in airplanes could pick it up better. I don't know that would help, but it just baffles me that I think I get the sense that the powers that be are a little frustrated. We keep having the same problems over and over and over.
I think it's stupid we have a damn CIFRA. I was listening to the guy that busted it all the way down to Reagan. It doesn't help to have the CIFRA. The planes are fast enough that they can get into the CIFRA and into the Capitol before anything happens. And it's just a pain in the ass. They're just getting the same problems over and over and you can see it from ForeFlight. You can't chart it right. It's an oblong shape. You can't like DME it or anything like that. So you basically have to have GPS. And that's fine, but it's not giving them any value. It is just causing them pain. That's all. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's an interesting.
But we're doing something about the problem.
I mean, they landed an ultralight on the White House ground. They ain't doing crap. And there was a person 3 miles from Reagan on last Saturday.
Really?
They cruised right through the Bravo cruise. I mean, you heard the Air Force on guard really pissed off at him.
No
they
kidding.
Didn't shoot down. So, I mean, I imagine they would have eventually, but he's only going 50 knots. So I doubt that jet can do much about it. It'd be better to scramble a helicopter.
Yeah, we hear Potomac all the time hitting people up heading into the CIFRA. You never hear about a follow-up of like what happens. All you hear is Potomac being angry about it.
Yeah. Well, if anybody wants to take a look at the slide deck that was produced last night or went through with John Tomiak, it is on the website. It's underneath the discussion and then training resources. So you can get the entire slide deck, and there's also links in there for different knee board resources if you want those too. So, so if you weren't able to tune in last night to the Fast Team event, all of that information is on the website. You can find that link on Facebook or going directly to the site itself. But thanks again for joining us this evening, everyone. Randy Tausig, it's nice to see you. I know you've had a long day, and I'm glad you could join us tonight.
Hey, Gabe. Yeah,
Hey.
I'm glad to be here. I know I'm a few minutes late, but I really wanted to see what was going on here. Looks like it's going to be a good meeting.
Yeah, thank you for joining. We'll talk soon.
Yep.
Let's see. Anybody else catch the crash happening to California? I didn't see that, Johnny. I did not see that on the news yet. I haven't really been on the news though. A Cap 182 in California. Evidently there was a crash. Was not aware of that. But
yeah, I caught it on Facebook Live. They were showing some live news footage, and the fire department had just put the fire out, and all you could see was really left of the airplane was a tail, and you could see the word patrol on the tail in the video they had, and they were saying it was a Civil Air Patrol 182T, and
okay.
out in California this afternoon.
Yeah.
Looked like he came down. Somebody speculated that he hit wires and it spun him around backwards, and he was trying to land on a street, I guess.
Oh, that's terrible. Yeah, I'll have to take a look. All right, well, let's see. So it is 7:10 Eastern time, so I think we'll go ahead and get started here. Again, thank you for all of you for joining this evening. It's always a pleasure to see familiar faces and especially new faces here. I definitely have some new folks in the room tonight, so thank you for joining. Absolutely thrilled to have our guest this evening, Martin Pauly, with us. Thank you so much, Martin, for joining us. I got to tell you, it's a very interesting story in that it's really simple, actually. Martin and I met down in Sun and Fun back in 2019 when Scott Young from Smokehouse and I flew down there and decided to camp. And Martin happened to be right beside us in 70 Tango Bravo. And that's how we met. And
That's right, yeah.
come full circle, here we are, and Martin is going to present to us on engine management and landing procedures. So absolutely thrilled to have Martin on. And just so you know, whenever you come in, I'm going to try to keep the mics muted just so there's not a lot of background noise. Give me 1 second here and go from there. So with that said, if you're not following Martin on YouTube, please do so. He has a ton of great videos online. And I was looking at your YouTube channel just a little while ago, Martin, and I noticed you have over 2.2 million views on your videos. That's quite impressive. So I've got to tell you, I've really enjoyed watching all your videos. They're absolutely filled with great information, and I love your desire to fly into Bravo airports. With that said, how many airports or how many Bravo airports have you flown into? Is it, do you think?
14
okay.
out of 34 in the lower 48. So
Nice.
not even halfway down the list.
Yeah, you got a long ways to go.
Yeah.
But no, that's awesome. And again, I love following your videos. You produce a phenomenal video. So well done there. But with all of that said, no further ado, Martin, it is all yours. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight, and welcome. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you, Gabe. And thanks everyone for joining. Let me try to share the screen here. And if I did that right, you should be seeing my presentation now. Is that coming across?
Looks good to me.
All right.
We got thumbs up.
All right. So this is me. Been a pilot for over 30 years. I started at the age of 14. Back when I lived in Germany, I flew gliders, and sometimes I joke that that's where my obsession for lean of peak comes from. And then later on airplanes. I have a commercial certificate. This summer I became a CFI. I was a glider instructor in Germany, then didn't instruct until this year, but picking that up again and enjoying it so far. The Bonanza that you see here behind me on the backdrop, that's mine, 70 Tango Bravo, an A36. That's been mine since 2012 with a normally aspirated engine. If you can't sleep at night, there are some ways there to follow me on social media to see what's going on. What we're going to talk about tonight is, I titled it Engine Management and Mixture Management. And a lot of people associate me with lean of peak because of that lean of peak video that I did. I don't want to leave here tonight and declare success as everyone from now on only flies lean of peak. Even I don't always fly lean of peak. But what I hope to do with these presentations is improve people's understanding of what it is. That it isn't evil, and that there are situations where it's good. What makes an engine run or not run lean of peak, those kinds of things. So with that in mind, we'll do a quick review tonight of just the basics of our four-stroke combustion, internal combustion engines. And we'll focus a lot on the fuel-air mixture and how that mixture affects what's going on during combustion. And then we'll try to come up with a definition of, what does it mean to run an engine well? And there's probably an infinite number of answers to that. And we'll look at some of those. And finally, try to put it all to use by going through the different phases of flight and try to apply what I talk about by looking at useful power and mixture settings for those phases of flight. I would like to ask you to hold questions until the end, if at all possible. Otherwise, we'll be here all night. If I go through this, it'll probably take about an hour or so. And for anyone still awake after that hour, I'll be happy to stick around and answer questions then. All right, so here is a typical engine, 6-cylinder Continental here, and we got the case in the middle, right? And then we got the cylinders, cylinder head and barrel, inside of which we have a piston that's moving up and down. And the piston is connected to one end of the connecting rod. The other end of the connecting rod goes to the crankshaft. And that mechanism translates the up and down movement of the piston into rotating movement of the crankshaft. Bet you're all familiar with that. Then we got intake and exhaust valves that open at the appropriate time to let air and fuel into the engine. or let the burned air and fuel out of the engine, not the engine, the cylinder. And finally, a spark plug to ignite that fuel air mixture. There's a lot more needed to make an engine, but those are the components that we are looking at tonight. And we put them together and we put them to work. It looks like this here, with the piston moving up and down, and the intake and the exhaust valves opening, and the spark plug firing at the right time. And let's look at this for each of the 4 strokes individually. So starting with intake, you can see the intake valve, the left one, opening, and as the piston is moving down, it sucks in air and fuel, a lot of air and a little bit of fuel, into the cylinder. The next stroke then is the compression, where the piston moves back up, both valves are closed, and that air-fuel mixture is now compressed, put under pressure. And just before the piston reaches what's called top dead center, when it's all the way up, the spark plug fires, this fuel-air mixture starts to burn, and as it burns and creates pressure and heat, that pressure is moving the piston down, and that is what's creating the power. And then finally, the exhaust valve opens, and the burned fuel and air that is no longer of use gets ejected. And then we start over. Intake, compression, power, exhaust. And from here on, we're going to look at intake and power. I mean, compression and exhaust are important, but we don't really control them or get much out of it. Intake is where we have full control. We control how much fuel and how much air goes in. And then during the power stroke, we yield the results out of that, which is horsepower and pressure and temperature. And that's what we're going to look at here for the remainder of the time. How our choices of how much air and how much fuel get into the cylinder affect the outcome. We control that with throttle and mixture, right? Throttle controls air and fuel, and then the mixture gives us additional control over fuel. But so far, I probably haven't told you much that you don't already know. As we control that fuel, there are lean mixtures and rich mixtures, and a lean mixture is one with relatively little fuel. A rich mixture is one with more fuel. All right, now let's make this a little more interesting and collect some data, make some observations. So this was taken in my Bonanza a few years ago in cruise, I think probably 8,000 or 9,000 feet high. Wide open throttle. This is a normally aspirated engine. And you can see here the mixture knob on the left. You can see the fuel flow gauge, showing about 15.5 right now. And then on the digital engine monitor, this is the old one before I upgraded to the EDM 930. This shows the readout just for one cylinder at a time of the exhaust gas temperature and cylinder head temperature. So mixture, right? Everyone knows that knob from flying. Fuel flow, that's pretty easy to understand. If I pull the mixture knob out, the fuel flow goes down. EGT and CHT, many of you will know this, but here we're starting to get into terms that many pilots have heard about, but maybe they don't exactly know what they are or what to do with them. So let's look at those for a moment. EGT is the exhaust gas temperature. And if you look at that picture here, you see the two pipes from the bottom going to the cylinder. The right one is the exhaust stack. So that's where the probe sits, the EGT probe. It's literally a piece of metal that sticks halfway into this exhaust stack. and that measures how hot the gas is that's coming out of the engine after combustion. That's all that is. The CHT, it's a different probe. It's a little hard to see. It's at the bottom here. It's the arrow points at it here. That measures how hot the metal of the cylinder is. So the temperature of gas and the temperature of metal. And we'll talk about what they're useful for and what to do with them. But an analogy that may be helpful to think of it is EGT is a bit like the temperature of a flame on a stove, and CHT is a little bit like the temperature of the pan that's sitting on the stove that you're warming up with that flame. By changing the flame, you can change the EGT or the flame temperature very, very rapidly, right? You add gas, gets hotter, flame gets bigger. The CHT equivalent, the temperature of the metal of the pan, lags behind just because there's mass in that pan and it takes time to adjust to the changes of the flame. And likewise, the EGT responds very, very quickly to changes that we make with the mixture and throttle, whereas the CHT always lags behind. It can take a minute or two after we make a change before the CHT stabilizes. So let's get back to the experiment here, and I'm going to show you what happens when I pull the mixture knob out. You notice here we have a starting fuel flow of 15.3 gallons per hour, which I'm reducing now. The EGT started at 1348 degrees Fahrenheit. And as I'm reducing the mixture, just observe what's happening. The fuel flow needle goes down. I mean, that's obvious, right? That's what pulling the mixture does. Means less fuel. But the exhaust gas temperature, the temperature of the gas coming out of the cylinder after each combustion stroke, is rising. And now I'm pulling out and I'm not seeing much change. 1447 was the largest number here. It's kind of reaching a plateau. And now as I'm reducing the mixture further, the numbers are starting to go down again. 1420 now. Yeah, and here I stopped. So what did we see? We saw the fuel flow that I very gradually moved from 15.3 gallons per hour to 13 gallons per hour. And we had an EGT that started at 1348 that rose to 1447. There was a peak there. And that in the end ended at 1415. So that's just a bunch of numbers right now. And when we try to make sense of numbers of data that we record in an experiment like that, it often helps to show that in a graph, to plot the data. And that's what we're going to do here. So I have this graph here where the horizontal axis is the fuel flow. I got a lean mixture, less fuel on the left, and a rich mixture, more fuel on the right. And I'm simply going to draw a line here that shows, that represents what we just observed for the exhaust gas temperature, right? From the right to the left, as I was pulling the mixture knob out, we saw the EGT rise and rise and rise, and then it slowed down, and there was a peak, and then it went down again. And that may not look all that exciting by itself, but let's stick with this a little moment and see what we can get out of it. So first, I'm drawing this thick vertical line here to mark where the peak EGT was reached. That was the 1447, right? The EGT goes down on either side, and it divides this chart into a lean of peak site and a rich of peak site. That's literally all these terms mean. Everything to the right of this line, where the mixture is richer than when EGT peaked, is called rich of peak, and everything on the other side is lean of peak. And then we have peak itself, right? That's the one place where we got the maximum EGT. But if people talk about lean of peak and rich of peak, well, that's what that is. There's that dividing line in this chart, and one side is rich of peak, and everything on the other side is lean of peak. I don't have numbers here on this chart, and there are a few reasons for that. One is the absolute numbers are really not important. Numbers depend a lot on a number of factors, including, for example, how far down the exhaust deck is that EGT probe mounted. So an EGT really isn't right or wrong or too hot or too cold. What EGT is a reference for us here to talk about this chart, to talk about mixture settings. What do I mean by that? Let me add 3 points that we observed in the little video earlier to this chart here. One is at peak, we had an EGT of 1447, and then to the right we had an EGT of 1297, and on the left 1417 on the lean of peak side. And the vertical axis here is degrees Fahrenheit for EGT. If I want to talk about my mixture settings, I could use gallons per hour, or I could say I move the mixture knob half out or so, but that's not always very meaningful. It turns out a very, very meaningful way to talk about mixture settings is to talk about how many degrees lean of peak and rich of peak we are. So to use the example here on the left, when we have 1417 degrees Fahrenheit, that is exactly 30 degrees below the peak EGT of 1447. And we call that 30 degrees lean of peak. That is a mixture setting. And we'll soon learn that 30 degrees lean of peak is in many ways a lot more meaningful than saying, well, I lean to 8 gallons per hour. Similarly, on the rich side here, this 1297 is 150 degrees below the peak of 1447. So we call that 150 degrees rich of peak. So you see what we're doing here. We're using EGT to kind of navigate on this chart, to talk about where we are with the mixture setting, and we do that by relating it to peak EGT. Okay, so far we have this chart. We can talk about where we are on the chart, but what does it bring us? Right now we just have the EGT. We need to put something else on the chart to make it meaningful. And next we'll add the horsepower that the engine develops. Now, I couldn't show you that in the experiment earlier, right? There's nothing in my cockpit that directly shows horsepower. I guess I could look at the airspeed indicator, indicate airspeed, and say that more airspeed means more horsepower. But on a test stand, on an engine test stand, you can certainly measure the horsepower that the engine produces precisely. And if you did that and you added it to the graph, the line would look something like this. With fairly flat line on the rich of peak side, and then a slightly steeper decline on the lean of peak side. And you notice maximum horsepower is different from peak EGT. It's a little over to the rich side. Further, we can add a line for CHT, cylinder head temperatures. And this is assuming that we give the engine a little time to let things stabilize. How hot will the metal of the engine get with the mixture setting that we've chosen? That's what this CHT line suggests. And it also peaks again in a different place than the horsepower or the EGT. So now we have something more useful, because we can, for example, if we wanted to produce maximum horsepower output, we could find out from this chart how to set the mixture to get there, and not just guess, but we would actually know it. Or if we wanted to get the CHTs cooler, right, we could use this chart to try to get an idea of what we need to do with the mixture to achieve that. So this is starting to look a little more useful. So to recap, we have so far looked at the exhaust gas temperature. And again, there's no good or bad exhaust gas temperature, but it helps us understand where we are on this chart. We can communicate about this chart with 20 degrees lean of peak and 50 degrees rich of peak and the like. We have cylinder head temperatures, and because metal and aluminum in particular loses strength as it gets hotter. It's easy to argue that cylinder head temperature should be low. Lower CHT is better, and I have an asterisk here. So if right now we think, well, I read something recently that says it shouldn't be too low, hold that thought, and we'll get to that in a moment. And horsepower. And what do we want from horsepower? We want that to be as high as possible, right? We all like to be at twice the speed of sound in our airplanes, and well, we need lots and lots of horsepower to do that. So we're going to try to look at what a good combination or way to optimize these different values is. But let's think about one more thing that's important here besides horsepower, cylinder head temperature, and exhaust gas temperature, and that's the pressure that occurs inside the cylinder, right? We need pressure to push the piston down during combustion, but as you can easily imagine, too much pressure could be bad, because ultimately everything has a breaking point, right? So we need to keep the pressure under control and not let it get too high. Now there's no gauge inside the airplane that measures pressure directly or indirectly. However, on a test stand that has special probes to measure the pressure inside the cylinders, the internal cylinder pressure, ICP, you would get a curve that looks exactly like the CHT. The units, of course, would be different, units of measurement, right? But how it slopes and where it peaks is almost the same as the CHT. So I'm not going to add another curve here. We're simply going to look at CHT to understand where we get peak pressure and how the pressure gets lower to either side. So with all these parameters in mind, how should we run the engine? What do we want when we fly from the engine? We want power, and as much as we need for the phase of flight. There can be very little for taxi or descent. And that can be very much for takeoff and climb. And the most power is achieved at approximately 80 degrees Fahrenheit rich of peak. So if that is the absolute most important, that's where we would set our mixture, 80 degrees rich of peak. And if that was the only thing that mattered, we'd be probably flying at that mixture setting all the time. But there are a few other considerations, like fuel efficiency. What do I mean by that? Well, fuel efficiency, to me, that's the number of nautical miles that I can squeeze out of a gallon of fuel, just like the gas mileage in your car, right? And more is better. It extends my range, and it can even help with speed, right? Maybe I can skip a fuel stop by getting more miles out of the fuel that I have available. Where is the good efficiency? Well, one thing that's easy to understand is it's not to the right of that star with the maximum horsepower, because if you move to the right of that star, the horsepower goes down, right? You see the declining slope of the horsepower curve. So we're slower, and the fuel flow will go up, because that is the very definition of moving to the right on this chart. So we burn more fuel for less speed. That's not efficient. So the best efficiency is found here on the left side of the chart, and that's the lean side of peak. If we want the maximum miles per gallon, that's on the left side, on the lean side of peak here. And then finally, we want a long engine life. At least all of us who are paying for engine overhauls or replacement, I bet want that. And let's think about what harms the engine, and it's pressure and temperature. They work in combination. Pressure, if I push something too hard, right, I can deform it and break it. And if something gets too hot, it gets weaker. I make it more likely that that pressure will harm it. So unfortunately, right, the CHT and the pressure curve, they overlap. The point where I get the highest pressure is also the point where I get the highest temperature, where I make the assembly the most vulnerable to that pressure. So that's an important consideration. And highest temperature and pressure, where do we find that? Right here, right, where the peak is of the CHT. But rather than just avoid this one spot, what we should avoid is an area where the CHT line is high. So I marked everything over above a certain threshold here on the CHT line. And that brings us to the concept of the red box. We want to operate the engine outside of the red box. On either side, we can be richer or leaner than the red box to avoid those high pressure, high CHT combinations that are damaging for the airlines. And there's another name for this red box, sometimes called red fin. I believe Cirrus pilots use that term. It's a slightly different diagram showing things in different arrangement, and then it doesn't look like a box. It looks like a little triangle, so they call it the red fin. But it's the same thing, same concept, really, just drawn differently. Red box is pretty large. It occupies most of this diagram here at high power settings. Now, when we reduce the power, for example, if we climb with a normally aspirated engine and we get to less denser air and produce less power, or I pull the throttle back, that red box gets smaller. My peak pressure and peak cylinder head temperature is still at the same place, but the absolute pressure and temperature are not so high anymore. And that's why the red box gets smaller as the power output of the engine decreases. And if I take even more power out, say 65% or below, the red box disappears. I can now do whatever I want with my mixture. I can run at peak horsepower. I can run at peak CHT if I want to. Maybe it's a cold winter day and I want to get maximum heating in the cabin. And the engine will not be harmed. So that's the concept of the red box. Now, I told you earlier, I'd get back to the question of CHTs, should they be cool, should they be warm? And the one argument that's been around forever, that's undisputed really, is aluminum in particular is what we have to look at for our engines here, and the temperatures we find in the engine. Aluminum loses strength at higher temperatures. And there's this chart here. Temperature on the horizontal axis, and yeah, this is in Celsius. Here I got 3 lines here with some useful Fahrenheit references, and then the yield strength on the left. What's yield strength? That's the pressure that we can put on this aluminum, where exceeding this pressure, instead of just making it elastic, it would deform the metal permanently. In other words, would break something. And you can see how that strength goes down pretty rapidly as temperature increases. And 460 degrees is the maximum temperature authorized for my engine, the IO 550 in the Bonanza, for the CHT. And that's kind of alarming, right? Because if you look at what that means, is that the aluminum only has half the strength of what it has when it's cold at 460. So I don't like 460. I like to look at 380 it's kind of the maximum where if I exceed that, I need to do something about it to get below 380. Anything right of 380, anything higher than 380, the strength goes down rapidly. And 350, you can see that's really what I see between 300, 350 on a typical day in my engine. You can see how the yield strength is quite high still there. There's another argument, and it was recently here this summer made by Mike Bush, and here's an article from AOPA Pilot. And what he says is there are deposits on the valve stems that increase if the temperature isn't hot enough. If the valve stem is too cool, there's condensation, and some deposits then get onto the valve stem, and they can make the valve sticky. I haven't studied this enough, to be honest, to have a really good opinion. I haven't heard a lot of people other than Mike talk about this. So I can't tell you that this is right or this is wrong, but I did want to throw it out here because it is an interesting discussion going on these days. What Mike suggests, oops, let me go back here, is to operate with CHTs between 350 and 400 degrees. And he hints that this may be more important for Lycoming engines than Continentals, because Lycomings have a different design of the valve stems. They run a little cooler than Continental, and that may actually be, ironically here, be harmful for them, the more efficient cooling. What I can tell you, I ran my Continental IO 520 to 2,600 hours, running it with the motto of making it as cool as possible. So a lot of people have been successful with cooler is better, and I guess time will tell what just how important this minimum temperature is, if you will. One thing I would stress here is if you want to pick your poison and go really, really hot or really, really cold, really, really hot, think 500 or more, can damage your engine in no time at all. I mean, we're talking minutes, those high temperatures, and it's not, you're not far off from detonation and other bad things, and that quickly leads to a spiral that if you don't react very quickly and do something about it, the engine may be destroyed in flight. If you run too cool, assuming the oil is warm enough to provide lubrication, that's an effect that acts much more slowly. So I'm following this conversation here about the valve sticking with a lot of interest, and haven't heard a lot of people chime in yet. I think everyone is kind of curious where this will lead. Okay, so now let's get to the application. How can we use all of what I talk about here in flight? And I'll apply that to an airplane like my Bonanza with a normally aspirated engine. If you have a turbocharged engine, then some things will be different. But let's use it as a learning tool here to understand how we can use the mixture control to our advantage in the different phases of flight. So let's begin with startup, and I would say that the two most important things here are, one is make sure the oil is warm enough so it can provide lubrication, right? We're getting into cold season here, so preheat the engine. That is really, really helpful, and aim for low RPM when you start. There's probably no easier way to ruin an otherwise perfectly good engine by starting it cold and having the throttle forward so that it revs up to 1,500 or 2,000 RPM right after starting, right? Cold, no oil yet. That's where a lot of damage is done. And so if you preheat and figure out your throttle setting for a low idle on start, that will be very, very good for your engine. By the way, that might maybe a good time to talk about starting troubles. If you have trouble starting your engine, keep in mind that if you have air and fuel and compression and a spark, your engine will start and run. And I would add that air and fuel have to be in a good ratio. Compression and spark, as long as everything is in good working order, if you crank the engine, you have compression, you have a spark. You also have air because you're not yet sucking in much, so you have ambient air pressure going to the intake port. So really, what you control is the fuel. And if you have trouble starting the engine, that means that you either have too much fuel or too little fuel. And it's just a matter of understanding your fuel system and getting that mental picture of how much air is there, how much fuel is there. Did I flood the engine or did I not give it enough gas, and then correct it. That is true even for the dreaded hot start, right? If you have trouble with that, again, air, fuel, compression, and spark, and it'll work. And in a hot start, what I often see is that people use too much fuel, and then they might think they have too little, and they add even more, and they make their lives even more miserable. But it's hard to give very specific guidance here because the specifics depend a lot on the aircraft and the engine that you have, and the fuel system in particular. But understanding that fuel system and understanding how much fuel and how much air is in the cylinder is the key to a successful start. Let's say we get that successful start accomplished, and now it's time for taxi or anything we do on the ramp. What I like to do is lean very aggressively for any ground operation. And with aggressively, I mean to the point where further leaning would make the engine run rough and stumble. That helps prevent spark plug fouling, and doing it aggressively will help you not forget to go rich again before you go to takeoff. Because if you have the mixture knob pulled so far back that it almost stumbles, an attempt to go full power with the throttle would make the engine would kill the engine, as opposed to taking off with a half-rich mixture where we might end up in the red box because the fuel flow isn't high enough. So if you do lean a lot and prevent that possibility on takeoff. Next is takeoff. And I have a copy here of what my POH says for the Bonanza. Throttle wide open, high RPM, 2700 is what my book says. And mixture full rich or best power, right? And if we're at a high density altitude airport, then that means that the mixture shouldn't be full rich. And you lean appropriately for that higher density altitude. But that's how I take off, right? There's really in the Bonanza, check your POH. There are some airplanes that are different, but most of the airplanes that we fly, normally aspirated airplanes that we fly, the throttle should be wide open and high RPM and mixture full rich. And if we do that, going back to the diagram, then this is where we operate with, you see that bright line on the far right, that's our mixture setting. We got not the best possible horsepower, but close to it, because that line is so flat on the rich side, the horsepower line. And we got that good horsepower with the lowest CHTs and internal cylinder pressures that we can achieve. And well, again, EGT it isn't good or bad, it just is, but that helps us find out where we are on the chart. So this is where we want to be for takeoff. Now, initial climb, we're a couple of 100 feet in the air, and what do we do now? And there are different schools of thought, different opinions. What I say is, don't change anything. You know, don't go to 25 squared or whatever, whatever people may tell you. Again, your POH may have limitations for how long you can run at full power or full RPM, and of course, those are important. But absent of those limitations, just leave everything the way it is for the initial climb. And here's why. If I reduce the throttle right now, you know, with a good intent of not working my engine too hard, most of our airplanes are set up such that full throttle gives it an extra little bit of fuel, and it does that so that I'm very, very rich and I'm not in the red box. Now, if I reduce the throttle, I get a fuel reduction, and that can take me into the red box. So I'm actually getting into the more harmful operating area for the engine. You know, therefore, I leave everything forward, throttle, full open, for the initial climb. Now, let's look at the rest of the climb here. And again, my POH says I can run full throttle, 2,700 RPM all day long. Most of the time I climb ridge of peak. It is possible to climb lean of peak. Climb rate's reduced, and I climb more slowly. The vertical speed is slower, so the climb takes a little longer. But it's a choice I can make to go ridge of peak or lean of peak. So let's look at either one. Ridge of peak, this was where I was for takeoff, right? And everything was good. And as I climb, I get into less dense air. So my fuel air mixture, unless I have an altitude compensating fuel pump, gets richer. So as I climb, I can lean. And it's easy up to that point, but how much exactly should I lean? And the answer is, look at your EGT. Pick any one cylinder that you have on your engine monitor and look at the EGT as you apply full power on the runway, you know, at or near sea level. And say that EGT is 1300. Now, as you climb, that EGT will be lower and lower as the fuel air mixture gets richer. Simply lean to keep the EGT at 1300. And that means you keep the picture here with the highlighted bar on the right. And that will be a good power setting for high power without the damaging CHTs and pressures. It's called the target EGT method. So note on takeoff what EGT you get and simply lean to keep that EGT. If we climb lean of peak, we got to be careful, because if we climb now and get into less denser air, our mixture gets richer again, and that takes us into the red box as the moving bar here just showed. And that is why a lot of people say you shouldn't climb lean of peak. There's nothing really bad or dangerous about it, as long as you make sure you stay on the far lean side. But if you neglect the mixture knob here, if you don't pay attention, you get into the red box. And if your power is high still in the climb, then that could obviously be a problem. Okay, climb is behind us. We're in cruise, and again, we have a choice. We can cruise ridge of peak or lean of peak. And the values that I give here as guidance, they're very rough, right? They depend on a lot of things, but roughly speaking, best speed, aim for about 150 degrees ridge of peak. Maybe a little lower if you're not making a lot of horsepower, if you're higher up. And that's slightly, right or ridge of the 80 degrees peak of the horsepower curve, but it gives lower CHTs and lower pressures than at peak horsepower. And by the way, I should mention here, when I say something like 150 degrees ridge of peak, we explored that earlier between the peak line and a cylinder. That difference, or I guess vertical difference, was 150 degrees. Now, our engines have multiple cylinders, right? 4 or 6. So if I put my 4 cylinders on the chart here, ideally they'd all be in the same spot, but they never are. Nothing is quite perfect in a piece of machinery like this. So we'll end up seeing them in slightly different places. And the 150 degrees ridge of peak means I reference the cylinder that is closest to the peak EGT line on this curve. In other words, if I were to lean and these four circles was going to start moving to the left, that leftmost line would be crossing the peak line first. That's my reference for ridge of peak, and there's a similar reference we'll see on the lean of peak side as well. We can fly. The efficiency will not be very good. Our nautical miles per gallon will not be very high, but we're getting good speed, and sometimes that's what we want, right? Sometimes we just want to get there as quickly as possible, and that's perfectly fine. Make sure to watch your CHTs. If they get uncomfortably hot, well, by now this isn't a surprise, make the mixture richer, because a mixture that's richer on the ridge of peak side leads to lower CHTs. And that way you can get them under control. Make it as rich as you need to get the CHTs comfortable. Now let's look at the lean of peak cruise. And again, it depends a bit on the power setting, but roughly speaking, a window between 20 degrees and 80 degrees lean of peak is a good place to aim for. In my normally aspirated Bonanza when I cruise at 7 to 10,000 or higher, I usually aim for 20 degrees lean of peak. Same idea here with multiple cylinders. We reference the cylinder that is closest to crossing peak if I were to richen the mixture here in this case. I also monitor the CHTs. On the lean of peak side, CHTs are usually cooler. You see how steep the slope there goes down for the CHTs on the lean side. But if I were to find uncomfortably warm CHTs on the lean of peak side, for example, in a lean of peak climb earlier that I talked about earlier, go leaner, right? People have gotten into trouble when they experiment with lean of peak and they say, well, we don't want to overdo it, we don't want to go too lean, right? Let's just see what a little leaning does, and that has the opportunity to get us into the red box where cylinder head temperatures are high. So when going lean of peak, and we're running too hot on the CHTs, go even leaner, and that will cool things down. If it doesn't, and you'd have to lean to the point where the engine starts to run rough or stumble, and you're still hot, something isn't right, then go full rich and work out whatever the problem is. I mean, don't stay there. But normally, if everything is working well on the lean of peak side, you can make it cooler by leaning more. And when I do this in the Bonanza, I cruise at wide open throttle. If I do want to adjust my speed, I can do that with RPM, and I can do that with mixture, right? I can lower the RPM, and that reduces my horsepower, and I can go leaner on the lean side of peak or richer on the rich side of peak. Not sure why I would do the latter, to reduce my my horsepower output. Especially on the lean side of peak, it's amazing how far you can stretch your range by just leaning more and more and more. If you have an engine monitor that shows nautical miles per gallon, the ones that are connected to the GPS, they know your ground speed, they know your fuel flow. Bring that up sometime and cycle through the full range of mixture available that you have when you're in cruise, and it's amazing how much more range you can get if you go to the lean side. Descend, well, we don't need much power for the descend, right? So we got lots of options here. We can descend with little power and slow airspeed, or we can leave the power in and enjoy the really nice airspeed on the way to the destination. I can go back to ridge of peak. Some people, even that like to cruise lean of peak, they go ridge of peak for the descent in preparation for landing, right? Nothing wrong with that. However, now we have kind of the opposite of what we discussed in the climb. Because the air will get denser in the descent, the mixture will get leaner. What does that mean? If I don't pay attention and I have high power, I might move inadvertently into the red box on the descent. And we got to pay attention here for the same reason, the very same reason we have to pay attention in a lean of peak climb, right? If we have high power and we're not watching this, we could end up in the red box. The only difference is that the climb, we always have high power, and the descent we might have lower power more typically, but the concept is equivalent. On the lean of peak side, the mixture will also get leaner in the descent, and I got to enrich in it to compensate for that. And if I forget to do that, I get leaner and leaner and leaner. Ultimately, the engine will run rough or stumble. That's my sign to twist the mixture knob and move it forward a little bit. But there's no chance of getting to those damaging pressures or temperatures here in the lean of peak descent. And then it's time to land, right? All good things need to come to an end. And I guess there are two schools of thought here, and neither one is right or wrong. They're just different. And some people like to have the mixture ridge prop high before landing, right? The idea is simply that they want to be prepared for a go around and have nothing but the throttle to worry about in the case of a go around, and control power with throttle on the way in. The other one is I leave the power setting and the mixture where they were for my descent, even a lean of peak descent. Still control power with throttle. The lean mixture causes less fouling of spark plugs than the rich mixture. The lower RPM creates less noise. Airport neighbors will like that. And the mixture will already be leaned for ground operations when I taxi back to the hangar. The downside is if a go-around is required, now I have more things to do, right? In particular, I have to push the mixture forward before I apply full throttle, like I discussed for when we talked about ground operations initially. Otherwise, the engine might go out, and that could be a bad surprise when you're trying to go around. Okay, so that's what I had prepared. There are a couple of resources I want to point you at if you want to learn more about it. One is the Pelican's Perch column by John Deacon. It's a wonderful set of articles that John wrote. They are available on AppWeb, free of charge. So if you do a Google search for John Deacon Pelican's Perch, you'll find dozens of articles about engine and propeller and mixture and fuel systems and whatnot. And John is a pilot who not just understands the technology behind it, but he also knows it from the practical application as a pilot. And his writing style is very enjoyable. Another one is a video that you can find on my YouTube channel. If you do a search for lean of peak on YouTube, I think that's all you have to type in. It should be one of the first hits there. You see lean of peak engine operations explained. That goes over some of the things I discussed tonight, more with a focus on lean of peak. But if you want to review the concepts like how EGT, CHT, and horsepower depend on your fuel flow, right? That you can all review there in that video. All right, so let me get out of sharing.
Thank you so much, Martin. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. And let's give Martin a round of applause via virtual round of applause. I love your presentation, Martin. It's fantastic.
Thank you. All right.
So are you open to questions, Martin?
No, no questions. I'm kidding. No, I'm.
Well,
Yeah.
I was monitoring the chat, and I wanted to kind of start back up. I do have a few on Facebook Live too, but Vic, I saw that you had some. You direct messaged me a few chats. I don't know if you meant to do that, but it looks like you're still on.
Yeah.
Go ahead and go for it, man.
Okay. Hey, Martin, that was outstanding. You know, having worked with Siemens, I can see a very Germanic preciseness in there. So that helps us all out, by the way. I want to get just one kind of sense from you. You know, when I asked the question, I sort of got part of it answered when you spoke further. But for me at least, you know, is it better to measure the EGT or the CHT, or both of them go in tandem? And is there that rule of thumb that you said 380 degrees on the CHT, you know, burns off all the contaminants that you need? And is that, you know, good for any engine, Continental or Lycoming, you know, most of which we fly, right? Something around, you know, what could we use as a, you know, we clearly understand that, you know, you've got to stay out of the red box,
Right.
which was a great learning for me. But that really, now I'm a little confused about when you're saying, you know, say 150, you know, rich of peak, are you not in the red box when you're, you know, does it not expand the scope of it if your engine is not behaving, you know, in the optimal way, right? Like every cylinder is not working in its most optimal way.
Okay, so what exactly are you looking for? Are you looking for guidance as to what should you look for on these gauges to be in a good place? Or?
Yeah, I mean, what do you need in your plane to look for in terms of its own performance first before you set your optimal, you know, cruise, you know, EGTs and CHTs? Does that make sense? I mean, 380, make it sound rough. It's around 11, you know, gallons an hour. You know, that's essentially what we're doing right now. A lot of us.
Yeah.
At least I'm doing, you know.
Yeah. So I think part of what I'm hearing is what should you look at? Is it fuel flow or EGT or CHT when you set your mixture?
Right.
So Mike Bush will tell you should look at CHT and use that for guidance. I'm more a fan of what APS, the Advanced Pilot Seminar, that's a class that unfortunately no longer exists. They used to do weekend classes in Ada, Oklahoma about engine management. That's probably the best resource that ever existed on this topic. And then the three gentlemen that did that got into an argument and they no longer offer this. They taught, and I am a fan of this thinking, is that you should look at EGT for determining your setting. Because if you remember the chart that I showed right at the beginning, that started with just the fuel flow and the exhaust gas temperature. That is the one thing that you can always rely on for knowing where you are on this chart. The other things will depend on what you do there, but the exact fuel flow to get to peak EGT, for example, will depend on the outside air temperature. Because with denser air, you need more fuel to get to the same ratio. And the exact cylinder head temperature that will result from your mixture setting will also depend on outside air temperature and altitude, just because of how efficient the fueling how efficient the cooling of the cylinder is through the airflow. So all these things are important, but to me, CHT and horsepower is the result of what I do. EGT is the input of how I control it, how I precisely determine where I want to run my engine.
Mhm.
And I know, for example, at cruise altitude, 20 degrees lean of peak is a good setting for my airplane and my engine. And on a warm day, that may result in 12.5 gallons per hour. And on a very cold day, that might be 14 gallons per hour. Of course, I can look at my fuel flow to get into the ballpark, so to speak. But if I want to do it with more precision, well, there's the German in me again, right? It's the EGT that gets me there.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, is that it's airplane and engine dependent and temperature dependent.
Yes.
Give the optimal.
Yeah, even
it's EGT and everything else sort of follows that.
Yeah, exactly. If you were to use CHT as a reference, on a very cold day, your CHTs are obviously cooler, right? Because the air cools the cylinders more, but the internal pressures are the same from the combustion. And you might be misled to believe that everything is good just because your CHTs are 375, right? That's not too bad, when in fact your pressures might be alarmingly high. And you wouldn't know that by looking at the CHT alone. Now, if you know that your EGT is 50 degrees rich of peak, well, that's about as bad as it can get for the internal cylinder pressures. That's why I believe the EGT should be used for determining your mixture setting. The other things are important, right? You need enough power for your climb. You need cool enough cylinders to not destroy them, and maybe you need warm enough cylinders to not get these nasty deposits and get sticking valves. But determine what you want through the EGT and then monitor the other things. That's my philosophy, and that's worked well for me.
That's great. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Martin. Anybody else have a question? Tom, I saw you just raise your hand. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Tom.
Loved your presentation. One of my concerns, I have a Comanche 250 IO 540, is I don't have an engine monitor. So I've got the one EGT and the one CHT.
Right.
And how risky is it to follow this process where I'm only really monitoring, the number 5 cylinder in the back?
Yeah. So the short answer is under 65% power, there's no risk whatsoever. You can experiment with that. And one thing I didn't mention earlier is as you lean and you cross the peak line and you get to the part where the horsepower line slopes down more steeply, you can actually feel the deceleration pretty easily. So if your engine still runs smoothly at that point, and you feel, not dramatic, but noticeable deceleration, and you're under 65% power, you'll be okay. And for sure, you'll get more efficient, right? That's universally true. The more you pull the mixture back, the more nautical miles per gallon you get, not just because your horsepower per fuel goes up, but also part of it is you're getting slower, you're getting less draggy, and that helps you fly more efficiently. The longer answer is, without an engine monitor that gives you cylinder by cylinder readout, you really don't know what your engine is doing, right? And you might have a situation, for example, where one of the fuel injectors is clogged, and limits the amount of fuel. Your total fuel flow is good and you should be okay. But one cylinder gets less fuel and might be operating inside the red box, right? That red box applies not to the whole engine, but to each cylinder. And you would never know, if you had a full engine monitor for each cylinder, you would see the, excuse me. You would see the CHT go up for it, and that would tell you something. And the EGT you could monitor as well. Mm-hmm. If you don't have that for each cylinder, you might be right in the middle of the red box with one cylinder and never know. And ironically, people say you need an engine monitor to run lean of peak. I would use this example and say, if you run lean of peak in cruise and you have that situation, you just get roughness. The engine is your engine monitor, because that cylinder with the broken, with the clogged fuel injector would not fire anymore, and you could unknowingly get into a situation rich of peak though, because the cylinder is still making good horsepower. It just has very high temperature and pressure, and you don't know it. So maybe that's the long version of saying an engine monitor is a really good thing to have. The higher performing your engine is, the more important is an engine monitor and understanding what the data on it tells you. Because higher performing engine just makes it so much easier to destroy your engine if you're not operating it right or something isn't set up right.
Okay.
But yeah, go experiment sometime in your Comanche, and go to cruise, go to 8,000 feet, wide open throttle, whatever RPM you use for cruise, and then just pull the mixture knob back and see if you can get to the point where you feel the deceleration. And when you do, you're lean of peak. And if you don't get to that point, well, you might not be able to fly lean of peak. And we didn't get into that tonight, but if you watch the lean of peak video, I talk a little bit about why some engines cannot run lean of peak.
Okay.
Thank you. Hey, did I see another hand that was raised? Chris Lloyd. Can I see a few others?
We have a 182 with the Continental 470. Is that one of those engines? Because in the POH it says not to run lean of peak. We do have an engine monitor. The plane was built in '67. I'm assuming maybe the engine, the tolerances and whatnot. There's more information since then. So is that old information, or does that still hold true?
Did you say an 0470?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there are a couple of ways to look at that. One is carbureted engines like yours tend to have a harder time with lean of peak. And the reason is, can I go back into present mode? Can I bring up a chart that I had earlier? Okay, yeah. Let me go do that, because it's easier. Yeah, so this chart here, carbureted engines, they have a harder time than fuel injected engines to get the same fuel and air mix to each cylinder. You get more variation from cylinder to cylinder. That's just by the nature of how they work. It's less precise. And if you're on the rich side of peak, I mentioned earlier that the horsepower line is really flat, right? You might be close to peak EGT on one cylinder and far on the rich side on the other, and they develop about the same horsepower. Now, imagine pulling your cylinders all to the lean side and having that same spread. It's easy to see how with the steeper slope of the horsepower curve here, you have a lot more difference between horsepower from cylinder to cylinder. And that's perceived as roughness, right? If your cylinders are not getting the same fuel air mixture, the engine runs very rough, and well, what do? We enrich in it until it runs smooth again, and that will probably take us back to the rich side of peak. So that's the reason why, generally speaking, a fuel injected engine is easier to run lean of peak than a carbureted engine. But the other reason is lean of peak was big in the airline piston days, when they flew across oceans, or even in World War II when bombers and fighters needed long range. Lean of peak was a military secret in World War II, because it was a strategic advantage for the armed forces. And then the jets came, and that changed everything. So we kind of forgot about lean of peak. And it wasn't until about 20 or 25 years ago when the concept re-emerged. And at that point, for whatever reason, I don't know how it started, a lot of the pilot community had convinced themselves that lean of peak was bad, should be avoided, because it would damage your engine, it would burn your valves, and you do all these bad things that scientifically we understand it doesn't do. But all those old wives' tales were created, and your POH may have been written right around that time when the assumption was that lean of peak is a bad thing.
So if we're able to lean and lean of peak within 30 degrees of EGT peak, and there's no roughness, then we should be okay.
Yeah, 30 degrees on the lean side from peak.
Right.
Yeah.
Because this engine routinely, if we're running rich of peak at 30 degrees, we have high cylinder head temperatures, high being maybe 405 to 410.
Yeah.
On 1 to 2 of the cylinders. So the only thing for us to do for that would be to enrich in the mixture. But if we can lean of peak the engine, it seems like those CHTs drop dramatically.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, 30 degrees rich of peak at high power is a very, that's close to your maximum CHTs and maximum pressures. 30 degrees lean of peak, again, because of where these curves reach the highest point and how they slope, 30 degrees lean of peak is a very good setting in most cases if you can get there. 30 degrees rich of peak is easy to get to, but you will probably not like the temperatures and pressures there. Good horsepower, but not good for longevity of the engine.
No. And this is a club plane, and everybody is running off of what this manual says and what the maintenance officer is saying, and it's not. I don't think it's the best option for us. Yeah, and
another factor. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust my. I need to get different earplugs. These keep falling out.
Send me your address.
Another thing to keep in mind is that a POH is to some extent also influenced by the marketing and sales department, right? They want to advertise the plane with high climb rates and high cruise speed. And well, where do you get the highest cruise speed? It's right around there, right? 30, 50, 80 degrees rich of peak. That's where you get the maximum horsepower and the maximum speed. And that comes at a price.
Chris, you talking about 2871 Romeo?
Yes.
And that's a nice plane. I like that. I saw that Michael McDaniel had his hand raised. Michael, all you.
Yeah, thanks, Gabe. Martin, thanks for doing the presentation. It's very good. Tell me, does this apply to FADEC airplanes? And then a follow-up.
So a FADEC does all the magic behind the scenes, right? And a FADEC controls the mixture based on optimization algorithms and objectives that are programmed into the box. And it uses everything we talked about tonight to do its thing, to do its job. And the FADEC, you might have the ability to set it to best power or best efficiency, and it will go to a rich of peak setting or a lean of peak setting in response to that input. So yeah, I would say this applies to a FADEC engine. You're just not the one manually controlling it. The FADEC does it for you.
Okay. And my follow-up is, what are the Tesla applications? I'm sure Gabe needs to know what Tesla applications there are.
Come on. I don't know about that.
Okay.
I was like, what did he just say?
Yeah, that was what I was thinking. What did he just say? Tesla applications?
I was like, what the heck is he talking about?
Is this an electric airplane or?
Right. There was a lot of electric airplane talk today. No, good stuff. Who else has a question? I did see something on Facebook Live, and I know obviously they can't talk from there, but this is from Charlie, and he says, when I run Lena Peak with my Lycoming IO 540, my temps are always below 350. And he had a follow-up, said this is a bit confusing. I don't know if there's anything you want to comment on that. Obviously, we can't communicate back and forth with him, but it was something that he kind of put out there. So I don't know if there's anything you want to mention on that, Martin.
Well, he said his temps are below 350.
Yep.
That's good. I don't know if there's the question added to that, or if he's looking for.
Yeah, he said it was kind of confusing, I guess, but I don't know. I'll see if he has a follow-up, but we'll see. I'm not exactly sure what that was. Anybody else still online that wants to? He says here, can't keep temps in the ideal range 350 to 400 when running Lena Peak.
Oh, okay. So temps are below. Yeah, that's the situation I'm facing. And like I said, I've taken that engine to almost 1,000 hours past TBO with that method. So I wouldn't be concerned. Mike Bush would probably have a different answer to that, but I think time will tell. This whole minimum temperature idea is fairly new in the discussion, and I don't know that there's a clear winner yet, and there may not be for some time.
Cool, thank you.
If you ask me, I would not be worried if your temperatures are between 300 and 350. And on my engine, on a cold day flying in the winter, I routinely have them all below 300, around 250 to 300. And I cannot say that I've had a problem with that.
Great, good deal. Thank you for answering that. Rick Keller.
To burn off all contaminants. All the publications that I've read, they say 380 cylinder head temperature for, let's just say Lycoming, which is what I was reading about, was ideal. Anything less than that, you've got some buildup that'll happen.
Yeah, like I said, that's a more recent discussion, I would say, this year, as opposed to what people have been studying and teaching for the last 20, 25 years. I'm not saying that's wrong. I just don't know how important that is and what the relative importance of avoiding these deposits is on the one hand, versus avoiding the pressures and temperature that weaken or damage the metal. I'm not saying disregard that. I'm not saying it's wrong, right? But a lot of people have run a lot of engines to a very, very high number of hours by trying to keep them as cool as possible. Before this minimum temperature concept was more widely discussed here this year. So I don't know for sure what the right answer is, and I'll be following that conversation though with interest.
Awesome. I see that Rick, you got your hand raised. Go ahead, man.
Yeah, I've got something to say, Martin. First of all, thank you very much. My wife and I, although we're old people, we're brand new pilots, and we're actually brand new plane owners as well.
Good.
follow up on the gentleman a couple questions ago. We've got a 63 182 with the 0470, and likewise the POH says to run it rich of peak. But it is, I understand it's your opinion that that is not correct. That we're better off to be lean of peak than rich of peak, even in that engine, despite the fact that POH is outdated in its thinking.
It's hard to define what better or worse is, right? If you want the best possible cruise speed, then go rich of peak. That's what gets you there. If you want the best possible miles per gallon, go lean of peak, or at least go as lean as you can, as your engine will let you go. If you want the coolest cylinder head temperatures in the summer, yeah, go lean of peak, right? So there's not one best or worse. It just depends on what you want to optimize or achieve on a given flight. Now, having said that, I mean, I probably need a legal disclaimer here. You know, I shouldn't tell people to ignore the POH.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to get your. Well,
but if that was my plane and my POH, I would ignore it.
Okay. Well, and that's what I get.
That particular limitation, not the whole POH, heaven forbid, but I would try to run that engine lean of peak, given that you know decades of research and data exist after that POH was written, and that engine, if it's set up right and if it gets a even enough fuel air mixture to the cylinders, it should be able to run lean of peak just fine. And the signal to you that it doesn't is it runs rough.
Okay.
Right. And
so you really can't hurt an engine by doing that, basically, is what you're.
Right. Not what hurts it is the pressures and temperatures, right? And lean of peak is a way to get away from the pressures and temperatures. So it should be a good thing. Do you have an engine monitor?
No, and that was going to be my next question. Well, I think we've still got the 1963 gauges, except we do have a more modern EGT gauge. And my question was going to be, I was always afraid of leaning too much that the engine would shut off. And that's probably not a valid fear, right? We've got a Vernier.
No,
you know,
the engine will run rough before it shuts off. Your fuel air setup would have to be absolutely perfect to go from running smoothly to shut off, you know, with another 1/10 of an inch of pulling the mixture knob, which is unlikely for a carbureted engine. The thing with your engine and the leg of an engine monitor is, if you lean until it gets rough and then push it forward a little bit, right? That's how many of us have been taught to lean.
Right.
We know nothing about engines, but CFI told us, in cruise, pull the red knob until it gets rough and then push it in just a tad bit and
that's exactly.
Yeah. Here's the funny thing. Sometimes people tell me and say, "Oh, you shouldn't fly lean of peak. It's bad." Oh, well, why is it bad? Well, burn your valves. Well, okay, how do you lean? And they say, well, I just pull until I'm a little rough and then I push it back just a little forward, and that's how I lean. And I say, well, how do you know you're not lean of peak at that moment? And then they give me the deer in the headlights look. But the fact of the matter is, without an engine monitor, without knowing if you have reached peak EGT, on the way to engine roughness, you don't know if you're lean or rich of peak at that point. And you might even have a couple of cylinders on the lean side and the rest on the rich side. And there's no way of knowing unless you have an EGT readout for each cylinder.
Okay. Safe to say that as I lean, or she, whichever one of us is doing it, the needle's going to go towards the center, and then at some point it's going to start back, and that's when I know that we've hit lean, and then we're going to come back about 30 degrees, and that should be, and honestly, a good engine monitor's on the short list of stuff that we want, but we're still recovering from CFIs and purchases and things like that. So eventually we'd like to do that. But in the meantime, if we go out and try this and we keep leaning, this needle's going to go until it stops, and then it's going to start coming back. And that's when we're going to know where peak is. and we get 30 or so degrees back from peak, we should be good.
Yeah. Well, just keep in mind you have that one EGT gauge for probably one cylinder.
Right.
Or yeah. So you know that one cylinder is good, right? You don't really know what the other cylinders are doing. However, if you fly at an altitude or a manifold pressure throttle setting where you know you're at, say, 60% power, you know you're good regardless of these, unbalanced fuel air mixtures. At power setting 65 and below, I would sign in blood that you can have the mixture anywhere you want. You will not damage your engine. So
awesome.
You can experiment with that safely.
Awesome. Okay. Well, again, thank you very much. I've probably gotten more out of this than most webinars, and we do a lot of these, and I really picked up a lot here. I really appreciate it. And Gabe, thank you for setting this up.
Yeah, of course. Nice,
Happy
nice
to
to
hear
see
that.
you both. Yeah,
Yeah,
awesome.
you too.
Hey, Steve Bloom, I saw you had your hand raised. I don't know if you still have a question or not, but I see you still online.
Yeah, I do have a question. Martin, thank you so much for taking the time. And I've got a really dumb question for you. I'm an engine monitor. It's a Cessna 182 S model with the Lycoming IO540 engine. I've got a Tanis preheater, and I've got an engine monitor. And I read recently, it's always seemed to me that my CHTs seem higher than they should be. And I've read recently that if you have this combination of a Tanis preheater and the CHT monitors or probes installed that way, that they can actually indicate 40 degrees hotter. But I read this online recently, 40 degrees hotter than they actually are. I didn't read this from Tanis or from JPI. Have you ever heard that before? Is that crazy, or are they onto something?
I'm trying to think. I cannot remember hearing or reading about something quite that dramatic. Now,
it came from a very reputable source, from the Pilot Workshops guys.
If you install an engine monitor, there are different options for where to mount the CHT probes, and depending on your heater, the heating elements might attach somewhere where other people have attached their CHT probes. So it is correct that your engine heater influences where your CHT probes are, and the location of the probe on the cylinder is quite feasible that it has an impact on the actual readout, right? If it's closest to the fins where all the cool air gets to, right, it would read a little cooler than at another location. What I'm trying to make sense of, and I'm struggling, is the 40 degrees. That seems large. I'm not saying that can't happen, but I have not heard that.
Okay, I'll keep digging. Thank you.
Yeah, the principal idea behind it, yes, it makes sense because of how the probes for CHT and the heating elements are mounted, and they each need to find a place, and there are different choices, and there's some overlap between them. But again, is it 40 degrees? That seems a little high to me, but I'm not really an expert there.
Okay, thanks.
I saw you, man.
Hey, Martin, I had one additional question. On your best efficiency slide, it says aim for 20 to 80% lean to peak depending on horsepower. Is that horsepower of the engine or percent horsepower that you're trying to reach?
The percent horsepower that you're trying to reach.
Okay.
So this applies to 160 degree and 160 horsepower engine, just like a 300 horsepower engine. If I run at close to maximum power, I need to be closer to the far lean side, so more degrees lean of peak to be safe. And that is particularly important with a turbocharged engine. So if you have a SR22T turbocharged Cirrus, and you run 85% power the whole way in cruise, you want to be really far on the lean side to get the pressures and temperatures under control. Whereas in a normally aspirated plane, where your cruise performance has to be lower, like 75% or 65% or something like that, you can get a little closer to peak with the mixture, get a little more horsepower as a result without risk of damaging your engine. So
so on the JPI,
what's the percent power that you're making at the moment?
Right, and our JPI shows percent power. So if we're just leaning until our percent power shows up at 65 or 70%, wherever we're reaching, we can tag that degree off of that degree down of lean and peak as the number to shoot for. But it'll be different by altitude, obviously.
The way you described it sounded like you're using the percent horsepower as a target you're trying to reach with the mixture knob. That's not how I would look at it.
Okay.
You would I guess you can do the last little fine tuning like that. However, and here's something that maybe I should have mentioned earlier. On the picture, this red box looked like it had sharp corners, right? It was red in one place and then white the next. And it's not like at 65% we're good, and at 66% all of a sudden the sky is falling, right? It's a very gradual change. This red box is it's a good learning tool to understand that that there are engine parameters that are more harmful than others, but don't look at it like 66 is bad and 65 is good. It's a gradual change, right? At 65%, I might be running 20 degrees lean of peak, or even at peak if I want to. And then if I go from there to 85%, it's a gradual change, and that's how I should look at it. So if you wanted to get to 65% and you're very low, say you're just 1,000 feet AGL for some sightseeing, and you want to go to 65% power, maybe reduce the throttle first, or reduce the RPM and get the lion's share of the power reduction out that way, and then do the rest with the mixture as you see fit to get there. And
thank you.
I would not leave throttle and mixture forward. Sorry, throttle and prop forward, and use only the mixture knob to set my power. Power is what comes out of it, is a result of my my settings. Again, to one of the earlier questions, EGT is what you set for. How many degrees lean or rich of peak are you, and then the resulting power, as the name implies, is the result.
Good deal. Anybody else have any questions for Martin while we have him? I'm good on Facebook Live, it looks like, so we're all set there. Mike Schwartz, I did get the email that you just sent me, so no problem. Martin, I want to thank you for taking the time tonight for going through this. This has been fantastic. Thank you also for allowing us to record this. We will put this on the website and go from there. I absolutely love the video that you have on your YouTube channel of this. This is a great topic, and you do a really great job explaining this. So I just want to thank you. It's been a great, it's been a pleasure working with you, and seriously having you on our calls, and all the input that you've provided over the past 8, 9, 10 months, whatever it might be. But let's everybody give one more round of applause to Martin. And Martin, thank you. Everybody have a safe rest of your night, and stay tuned for some additional meetings that are coming up. We are in the process of scheduling those out, but there'll be some more coming up probably in the next 2 weeks. And there'll be another few meetings on the fast to get some more wings credits. But thank you all for joining us, and we will see you soon. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Take care.